This Steve Jones Show podcast is now loading. The Steve Jones Show podcast is presented by Sunbury Motor Company, Purdy Insurance, Brewers Outlet, and NIL Game Changers. Bringing you an in-depth look at Penn State sports and more. This is the Steve Jones Show on News Radio 1070 WKOK. The Steve Jones Show is presented by Brewers Outlet, NIL Game Changers, Sunbury Motor Company, and Purdy Insurance. Now from the Sunbury Motor Studio, here's Steve Jones.
This half hour brought to you by Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. Imports, domestics, microbrews, the best selection of beer anywhere. Wine coolers, water, soft drinks, snacks. They roast their peanuts fresh and out every day. 6 great flavors of slushies. Pickle bar, led by the barrels and the dills. Indeed, second to none. All at Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket. And very pleased, as always, to be joined by the outstanding Mike DeCourcy. Mike, first of all, how are you? And I hope the vacation you went on was relaxing and enjoyable.
It was good. It was actually part of the reason I went down to North Carolina. We have family there, but I went down to attend a coaching seminar that Mike Tomlin was part of. And while I was there, it turned my time with family turned into a celebration of my nephew's athletic and musical achievements. It was awesome. I got a chance to see him at a band concert and see him named, I think, co-MVP of his cross-country team, something like that was his award. So it was really cool to be there.
That is really great. I'm glad you were able to do that. What did you get out of that seminar? On the seminar part, what did you get out of it?
Well, it was interesting. Tomlin was there. It was called the Next Up Coaches Symposium or something, whatever. The Next Up is the brand name, what you would call it. But the idea was to help advance the cause of minority coaches. It was started by Tomlin and Lavelle Moten, who is the head basketball coach at North Carolina Central, and they became friends a little more than a decade ago, and they have partnered to do this to try to raise the raise the opportunity for minority coaches. It was based on, in part, on an article that I wrote a while back, a few years ago, about how one of the really disturbing elements of what we call the coaching carousel or the coaching ladder in college sports is how there aren't any rungs for HBCU coaches. It's something I first wrote about 30 years ago. And then I was on a conference call. It was like a Zoom sort of podcast with the Field of 68 team. I think it was around 20 or 21, right around there. And I asked some members of search firms, because they were on this Zoom podcast as well, why doesn't that happen? And they didn't have a good answer for it. And it created a little bit of controversy, and I followed up with an article about how this problem persists. And so they're trying to be proactive about trying to erase that issue, trying to allow, if they wish, HBCU coaches to move forward as, say, the coach in the Southern Conference or the Southland Conference or the WAC or the WCC or whatever else. They move upward in terms of finances and toward the Power 5 level, but it's not happening for some really excellent coaches like Lavelle in the HBCU space.
Exactly. You also wrote a really nice piece on He Was the Best of Us, the world-class book of Grant Wahl's work. And it's not just the impact on soccer. What kind of writer was he, and what made him such a credit to the profession of journalism, sports journalism?
Yeah, Grant was an excellent writer, but he was a better journalist, and that's one of the things that hit home when I looked at some of the pieces in the collection called World Class that was published yesterday. It's available on all the major book sites, as well as if you go into a bookstore, you'll find it. He was an even better journalist. It kind of made me feel small because, I mean, he's going to places like in advance of the Qatar World Cup in 22. He's going to Qatar and telling the story of workers who were dying on the job there, and he did some tremendous, phenomenal work in that respect. And in that case, at that point, he's working for himself, basically, on a Substack. And so any money, to an extent, any money he takes out of the travel budget to go to Qatar to do pieces like that is coming out of him, more or less. And he still did it. I mean, he had to go for the World Cup where he passed away because that's what he does, but he didn't have to go to tell that story. But he did because he had to, because that's who he was as a journalist. As good a sports journalist as I've ever met, as good a guy. I got to know him back when he and I were both covering national college basketball for magazines in the early 2000s. And one of the annual things we do is either at a regional or a Final Four, there always was there was an international soccer window always in that month, sometime in March. And we'd be at a regional or we'd be at the Final Four, and there would be a U.S. game, and we would go find a sports bar to turn it on for us and watch together. And it was an annual tradition for us for 6 or 7 years that went away once he became a full-time soccer writer and he wasn't at the Final Four anymore.
You also wrote a great article on look, Caitlin Clark's in the WNBA now, and it has been an interesting ride so far. And you and I both know the WNBA has struggled to find any kind of foothold. Right? I mean, we're not saying it's a bad league. I'm just saying they've been struggling to find a foothold on TV and with fans and so forth. Caitlin Clark opens a lot of doors. What has been your thought on how her game on the floor in front of everybody has been treated by the other players in the league and by the league itself?
Yeah, I think that the problem starts with the league, Steve.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not surprised at particular players trying to get in the frame, so to speak, to show who's tougher, or you think you're good, well, watch what I do. I haven't seen a lot of that. I've seen more to show who's tougher, but I haven't seen a lot of people that have made an effort to show they're better players than Caitlin, because that's not as easy to do. It's easier to shove her from behind, but I'm less bothered by that than I am by how the league and its game officials have handled that. Right. You know, there was a reaction to a widespread reaction to Kennedy Carter's shove from behind that was penalized as a common foul in the third quarter of Saturday's game between the Chicago Sky and the Indiana Fever. It was not the worst thing you've ever seen. It was not even, I don't even know that you'd call it dirty. I'd call it cheap. No. But I wouldn't even call it dirty.
It wasn't Kevin. It wasn't Kevin McHale and Kurt Rambis. Okay.
No. I mean, it wasn't. You know, it wasn't awful. Other than how it was officiated.
Right.
The fact that it was called a common foul, it was one of the most amazing things I've ever seen, because if you saw it, you knew it wasn't a common foul.
Right.
There was nothing involved with actual basketball activity on the play. It wasn't that she was going up for a shot or a rebound and was pushed and undercut by accident, or maybe not by accident. It was she was standing there waiting for an inbounds pass, more or less, and somebody came up from behind and shoved her. Now, if you hadn't seen it, okay, I can see you hadn't seen it. It wasn't real great basketball activity, so maybe you were looking at something else. But you saw it and called it common. That's horrendous, and that's the problem. The problem is if you don't protect the star attraction and you allow that kind of stuff to happen. It was, like I said, that was no big deal. But what if just by accident she'd fallen and broken her wrist? What if it had been more egregious and she was injured because of that? You have to protect against those what ifs by making clear to the other players that that's not going to be allowed. One of the interesting aspects of this whole conversation relative to that play is that there was a rebuttal to that about, well, why wasn't anybody talking about Caitlin Clark and how she was hit by an opposing player in a different game. And then I went back and looked, and I saw, well, for one, it was correctly officiated. The player who cheap shotted her was thrown out of the game. That's right. Not the same.
That's right.
If you get thrown out of the game, that's what's supposed to happen. Now, I'm not saying that Kennedy even needed to be thrown out of the game, but that could have impacted the result. It ultimately didn't, the Fever won, but it could have impacted the result for that to be common, because it would have been 2 shots in the ball instead of just retained possession for the Fever. And that's a problem. If you don't protect the game and protect the player in that circumstance, you've got a real issue. And then you go up to the league level, Steve, and you've got the fact that the Fever played 11 games in the season's first 20 days, including a 3-game and 4 nights West Coast road trip from Indy to Seattle to L.A. to Vegas. I mean, you're not even trying to take advantage of this star attraction you've been handed, other than to get every last nickel from the early attendance before maybe people get bored with it, if that's your fear. But I don't think that people are going to get bored with it. They didn't get bored with Caitlin in 2 years at Iowa. And if you handle this properly, that won't happen here.
Right. Well, I mean, history's a great teacher. I mean, look what happened with Red Grange, for example, when they barnstormed all over the place because the NFL was desperate to get them out there back in the 1920s. But I feel timing, right person, right place, right time. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson, right time, right place. Tiger Woods, right time, right place. Caitlin Clark, right time, right place, and the league has to understand that.
And they clearly don't, Steve, and that's the problem. I think I'm not asking for the other players to stand aside as she walks in and scores a layup. I'm not asking for that. I'm just saying, don't trash her off, when you're off the floor. I don't think that adds anything. If you're trying to diminish her as a player verbally, I don't see how that adds anything to your product. Oh, she's not that great. Okay, well then maybe the next person doesn't watch. That's one fewer person to watch your league. Like you said, look. You said it's not that it's a bad league. It's a great league. It's the best women's basketball players in the world in that league.
That's right.
They've won 75 Olympics in a row. It's a great league, but it's not a widely followed league. They have a passionate fan base, but it's a small one, and it's not a lucrative one. When your top players are making in the low 6 figures, it's not lucrative enough. Your top players should be pushing 7 figures and beyond, but they're not. But if you allow Caitlin Clark the opportunity, not allow her to just play and score and play uncontested, but just allow her the opportunity to compete and don't try to demean her, there's a chance that she could start pushing the entire league toward that threshold that I talked about.
I talked earlier about the House settlement. I've been talking about this for months. But you wrote a really interesting piece a couple of weeks ago about why the settlement is good for March Madness. How do you view that as to how this settlement can be good for March Madness, especially over the next 10 years?
A couple of years ago, after Mark Emmert announced his retirement, too bad he didn't announce his retirement in 2009, but once he announced his retirement, I did a piece where I interviewed a lot of different people about who would be the next, what sort of person, if not the actual person, what sort of person would be the next NCAA president, background, experience, all that sort of stuff. Talked to a lot of different people, and among the people I talked to were some athletic directors, and I was getting a lot of conversation about how it was likely at that point, if not inevitable, that the college football group, the Power 5 or all of FBS, would be departing the NCAA's umbrella and begin contesting their own circumstance outside of the NCAA. And there was a lot of talk about how that was going to happen. And then all of a sudden it disappeared. And the reason it did was the House case. Because what I've been saying for nearly a decade is that the NCAA is of great value for 2 reasons. Everybody looks at the NCAA as a rulemaking organization and a rule-enforcing organization. That is not what it does best, and it has never been. What it does best is run championships, March Madness and the College World Series, the two ones we're going to see in the next few weeks, and the College Cup in soccer and all the rest. That's the thing it does very best. But its greatest value to the membership was as a liability shield. They had lots of money in storage for days like this, and they also have the income generated by March Madness to help deal with lawsuits that were going to come about because of amateurism issues. And so now you're seeing that. And in this case, the first big chunk of the money is coming from the NCAA itself, nearly all of which was generated by March Madness. And the future payments that are going to be extracted from the conferences are all coming out of future payments through March Madness. So, you can't have future payments if there is no March Madness. This is a 10-year write-off, more or less. So they got to stick around for another decade in order to get the money to pay the bills. If the Power Five decides to walk away, they not only have to set up their own organization, which is not free, and take on whatever liability issues that exist, and we've seen how painful that can be, but they also would have to come up with a significant chunk of money to pay for their part of this particular settlement. They can't walk away from it by quitting the NCAA. They are on the hook for collectively, as of now, $660 million. I believe it's $660 million.
Yes.
And so that's not going to be, okay, so maybe by year 9 they could walk away and take a small hit. But that's what I'm saying is that it's going to go for a while because that's the way to pay this bill.
Exactly. Because what the NCAA men's basketball tournament's, $1.1 billion? All right. That's per year. Right. 770 million for the television rights of it?
No, it's going to 1.1 billion.
It's going from 770 to 1.1.
Yes.
From 770 to 1.1. So look, every time you look around, there's only one way to either breaking even's not the right word. You actually stay ahead of the game by staying in the NCAA because of the increased payouts.
Yes. And because you're right now, your payout as part of this settlement is tied to future NCAA tournament revenues. That's how they structured it. There's a lot of conversation about how the mid-major and low-major schools are getting stung by this because most of the money is going to Power 5 football players, and why do they have to pay for it? Well, here's a couple of things that no one else is telling you, Steve. One, the Division I schools that are non-FBS always use their numerical power to fight against any increase in remuneration for college athletes. They were all in on amateurism because it didn't cost them anything.
That's right.
So you're part of this because you kept the rules in place and you benefited from them.
Yeah.
You benefited from them by not having to compensate your athletes during all that period of time. So, sure, of course you should have to pay. The second thing is, all the complaints, Steve, nobody is taking a hit on this because the money is increasing by 40%, as we mentioned, 770 to 1.1. Mm-hmm. It's increasing by 40%. So no one's taking a pay cut here. They're just getting less of a raise. So please stop the weeping over that. Right. They don't warrant it.
Instead of getting, let's just use small numbers, instead of getting $100 extra, you're going to get $70 extra, which means you're $70 ahead of where you were.
Exactly. It's exactly right.
We'll do it in the common man term. That's it. Mike, you're the best. It's so great in the off season just to connect with you. We'll talk again soon, I hope.
Real pleasure, Steve. Anytime.
The great Mike DeCourcy, and seriously, great. Great guy, and just a great writer, terrific broadcaster, does just excellent work. All right. This half hour brought to you by Brewers Outlet, Reagan Street in Sunbury, the beverage supermarket, here on News Radio 1070 WKOK.
There's something to be said about a sale with a handshake, a service technician who really knows what he's doing. They can explain it in English what the problem is. There's nothing better than having that friend you could trust in the area. That's Sunbury Motors, where you get selection, knowledgeable salespeople, and prices that fit your budget, and more important, that friend you can trust. Welcome to Sunbury Motors, Kia, Ford, and Hyundai. You could shop other dealers and compare prices, but at Sunbury Motors, you get their lowest price promise. They research the current used vehicle market and guarantee their used car prices are the lowest. If you find a lower price, Sunbury Motors will beat it. 3 dealers all in one. See their full new and pre-owned inventory at sunburymotors.com. Pick out a vehicle you like and schedule your test drive online. Follow them on Facebook. Sunbury Motors Ford and Hyundai, North 4th Street, Sunbury, and Sunbury Motors Kia, routes 11 and 15 in Hummel's Wharf.
You want a unique way to display your brand. You need a team of seasoned experts to work with. You want to reach customers who buy. You want NIL Game Changers, a versatile consulting agency powered by former student athletes and coaches who work as NIL sports agents. NIL Game Changers will help you build powerful relationships with customers through compelling stories, with student athlete influencers as your leading edge. Finally, we'll equip you with the right media to drive your success home. NILGameChangers.org, building meaningful relationships with your customers.